The night this story truly began, 3 different phones rang in 3 different cities, all within the same minute. None of the callers knew the others were dialing. None of them knew they were about to say the exact same words. And none of them understood why their hands were shaking in the same strange rhythm, as if something unseen was counting down inside their bones. In Lahore, Adil woke up on his apartment floor with a burning ache across his chest and the taste of rust in his mouth. In Karachi, his older sister Sarah jolted awake screaming from a dream she had never had before, yet somehow remembered perfectly. And in Islamabad, the youngest, Hamza, sat straight up in bed, whispering a sentence he had never learned, in a voice that did not sound like his own. The sentence was old. The words were heavy. And when they later compared notes, they realized they had spoken it at the exact same time. These siblings had not been close in years. Life had scattered them apart after their father's death. Adil worked late nights and barely returned calls. Sarah was busy raising her daughter and trying to forget the past. Hamza was still in university, living alone for the first time, and enjoying the freedom. They shared a last name, a childhood home, and a mother who had passed away quietly 5 years earlier. They did not share nightmares. At least not until that week. The dream started small. A dark room. A single candle. A woman's voice crying, not in pain, but in apology. Each night the dream returned, clearer than before. The same symbols carved into the floor. The same cold pressure on the chest. The same whisper that said, "We are still divided." All 3 woke with identical red marks on their arms, thin lines like old scratches, not bleeding, not fresh, but sore to the touch. Doctors blamed stress. Friends suggested coincidence. Deep down, each sibling felt the same fear growing, even though none of them had spoken to the others yet. What made it impossible to ignore was the language. None of them spoke Latin. None of them had studied ancient texts. Yet the phrases came out perfectly formed, slipping from their mouths during sleep, during moments of panic, even once during a work meeting when Adil blacked out for several seconds. The phrases were always the same, word for word. When Sarah finally recorded herself talking in her sleep and sent the audio to Hamza as a joke, his reply came instantly. He sent back his own recording. The voices were different, but the words were identical. That was the moment they decided to meet. They chose their childhood home, now empty and waiting to be sold. Dust covered the furniture. The walls still carried faint pencil marks from when they were children measuring their heights. The house felt smaller than they remembered, but heavier, as if it had been holding its breath for decades. The first night together, none of them slept. They sat in the living room, lights on, sharing everything they had been hiding. The injuries, the dreams, the fear that something was wrong not just with them, but with their family. It was Sarah who remembered their mother's journals. Hidden in a rusted metal trunk in the storage room, the notebooks were old, their pages yellowed and fragile. Their mother had never talked much about her youth. She had always avoided questions about her own parents, about the village she grew up in, about the reason she moved away so suddenly. As the siblings read through the journals, a pattern emerged. Strange illnesses, nightmares that lasted years, a constant feeling of being watched. And then, one entry dated nearly 30 years earlier, written in shaking ink. She wrote about a ritual. Not a dramatic one, not candles and chanting like in movies. It was described as desperate. A last attempt by a young woman who believed something had attached itself to her, feeding on her fear, slowly breaking her mind. She wrote that an elder told her the burden could be divided, that instead of one soul carrying the weight, it could be shared. The ritual would not destroy the presence, only scatter it. Bind it across blood, across children yet unborn. The final line of the entry was underlined 3 times. They will never be free at the same time. As the siblings sat in silence, the lights flickered. What followed was not immediate terror, but confusion. If this was true, why now? Why had the possession symptoms appeared at the same time, after years of normal lives? The journals offered one clue. Their mother believed the division weakened over time, that the demon, or whatever it was would eventually try to reunite itself. And when it did, it would call all its pieces back together. That night, Hamza collapsed. His body stiffened, his eyes unfocused. He spoke the same ancient phrase again, but this time it did not stop. Sarah tried to hold him, only to feel a sharp pain shoot through her own arm, as if the injury had transferred instantly. Adil felt dizzy, nauseous, and suddenly knew, without being told, that Hamza was seeing the same dark room from the dreams. The same candle, the same voice. When Hamza finally came back, gasping and terrified, he said only one thing. "It knows we're together." Outside, the wind howled through the empty street. Inside the house, the siblings realized something horrifying. Whatever their mother had divided was no longer content to remain apart. The identical possession symptoms were not a coincidence. They were a warning, a countdown. And the closer the siblings came to understanding the truth, the stronger the presence became. They had inherited more than trauma. They had inherited a shared curse. One demon, 3 lives, and a choice their mother made that was never meant to be undone. Because if the ritual could divide the burden, what would happen when the demon decided it was time to be whole again? After that night, none of them returned to their separate lives. The idea of distance now felt dangerous, as if being apart would give whatever followed them more space to move. They stayed in the old house, sleeping in shifts, lights always on, phones charged and recording. Fear made them careful, but it also made them honest. For the first time since childhood, they talked about things they had buried for years. Sarah admitted she had always felt watched when she was alone, especially after her mother died. She had blamed it on grief, on exhaustion, on the stress of being a single parent. Adil confessed that he had struggled with sudden anger for as long as he could remember, moments when he felt like someone else was pushing his thoughts. Hamza, the youngest, said he often felt like he was missing time, like parts of his day slipped away without memory. Alone, these things felt manageable. Together, they formed a pattern that none of them could ignore. The journals became their guide and their curse. Each page revealed more fragments of their mother's past. She wrote about seeking help from doctors who found nothing wrong, about religious leaders who advised prayer but seemed frightened when she described the symptoms. Eventually, she was led to a woman known for dealing with shared burdens. The journals never named the entity, never described it clearly. It was always the presence, the weight, or simply it. That vagueness made it worse. A name might have made it feel contained. This felt endless. One entry mentioned that the ritual was timed with a lunar cycle. Another warned that blood ties were not just symbolic, but necessary. The presence, according to the journal, could not survive division without a strong connection between its hosts. Family, children. That realization hit the siblings hard. This wasn't something they had caught. It was something they were born into. As the days passed, the possession symptoms intensified in small but unsettling ways. Objects moved slightly when no one touched them. Whispers filled the space between sentences, just quiet enough to question whether they were real. The siblings began finishing each other's thoughts without realizing it. Once, all 3 reached for the same glass of water at the exact same moment, startled not by the action, but by the sudden shared feeling of thirst that hit them together. Sleep became the most dangerous time. When one of them drifted off, the others watched closely. The dreams no longer stayed separate. If Adil slept, Sarah would feel pressure in her chest. If Hamza nodded off, Adil's hands would start shaking. They began to understand something terrifying. Whatever had been divided was not just connected to them individually. It moved through them, used them like rooms in the same house. They decided to look beyond the journals. Sarah contacted an old friend who worked in archival records, someone who could access historical documents quietly. She searched for anything connected to the woman mentioned in the journal, the one who helped with the ritual. Days later, the response came back thin but chilling. The woman had been investigated decades earlier for involvement in unlicensed spiritual practices. Several families had come forward claiming unexplained illnesses that seemed to pass between relatives. The cases were never proven. Most were dismissed. A few ended abruptly when the families moved away or stopped responding. One note stood out. In every case, the disturbances resurfaced after a long period of silence. Always when the family members reunited. The siblings stopped speaking after reading that. They began to argue instead. Adil believed staying together was making things worse. He argued that separation might weaken the presence again, stretch it too thin to act. Sarah disagreed. She believed distance would make one of them vulnerable, leaving the others unaware until it was too late. Hamza said very little, but his silence worried them most. He often stared at the journals as if he was remembering something that hadn't happened yet. The house itself seemed to respond to their tension. Doors creaked open. Shadows lingered longer than they should. One evening, the power went out across the entire street, yet their house remained lit, humming with electricity that didn't make sense. The lights flickered in a slow rhythm, matching the strange counting sensation Adil had felt that first night. That night, they all dreamed together. They knew this because they woke at the same time, breathless, with the same image burned into their minds. A circle drawn on the floor, 3 figures standing apart, and a fourth shape in the center, blurred, shifting, never fully visible. The voice spoke again, clearer now, no longer apologetic. "You were never meant to forget." Hamza woke with a fresh mark on his wrist. Sarah felt it burn on her own skin seconds later, in the same place. Adil watched it appear, helpless, as if reality itself was delayed. There was no denying it anymore. The injuries were not separate. Pain itself was shared. By morning, exhaustion stripped away their fear and left something colder behind. Determination. They made a plan, not to end what was happening, but to understand it. They mapped the journal entries. They listed dates, symptoms, patterns. They marked every time their mother mentioned feeling relief, and every time she wrote about the presence growing restless. One line, buried deep in the pages, began to feel important. Division is not mercy. It is delay. What if the ritual had never been meant to save her? What if it was only meant to buy time? As the siblings dug deeper, strange things began happening outside the house. Neighbors complained of hearing voices. A stray dog refused to come near the property, whining and pulling against its leash. Hamza received messages on his phone from unknown numbers, empty texts sent at the same time every night. Sarah's daughter, staying safely with a relative, called crying after a nightmare she couldn't explain, describing the same candle, the same dark room. That was when Sarah realized something new, something that made her hands tremble. The presence wasn't limited to the 3 of them anymore. The journals ended abruptly, as if their mother stopped writing out of fear, or hope, or something worse. There was no final answer, no instructions, no warning of what to do when the burden tried to reunite. Only silence. And silence, they were learning, was where the presence felt strongest. As another night settled over the house, the siblings sat together, listening to the walls breathe, wondering if their mother had ever truly escaped what followed her, or if she had simply passed it on, believing love was enough to hold it back. Somewhere between heartbeats, the whisper returned, closer than ever. "We are almost whole." And this time, it didn't sound like a threat. By the 3rd week, the house no longer felt like a place of safety. It felt like a meeting point. The siblings noticed it first in small ways. Sounds echoed longer than they should. Footsteps seemed to follow them from room to room, never loud, never clear, but always present. The air felt heavier at night, thick enough to press against their skin. None of this was dramatic enough to run from, but all of it was impossible to ignore. Adil started keeping notes of his own, mirroring his mother's journals. He wrote down times, sensations, thoughts that didn't feel like his. What disturbed him most was how often the notes matched Sarah's and Hamza's experiences without them speaking. At 2:17 a.m., all 3 felt a sudden wave of sadness that didn't belong to any memory they recognized. At 4:40 a.m., they all felt a sharp sense of urgency, like something important had been forgotten. These shared emotional spikes scared them more than the physical signs. Pain could be explained. Feelings were harder to separate from the self. Sarah struggled the most with guilt. Every time she spoke to her daughter on the phone, she felt like she was lying by omission. She didn't mention the whispers, the marks, or the fear that something was reaching beyond the house. She began to notice changes in herself when she hung up the calls. Her voice would linger in Sarah's mind, repeating words out of order, as if being replayed by someone else. One evening, Sarah caught herself whispering her daughter's name without realizing it, her tone flat and unfamiliar. She locked herself in the bathroom and cried silently, terrified of what might happen if the connection spread further. Hamza, meanwhile, became distant in a different way. He spent hours sitting alone in the old storage room where the journals were found, surrounded by boxes of forgotten belongings. He claimed the space felt quieter, but Adil noticed his brother often stared at the wall, listening to something no one else could hear. When questioned, Hamza brushed it off, saying he was just tired. But his eyes told a different story. They held recognition, not fear. As if something inside him was starting to feel familiar. One night, Hamza admitted something he hadn't told them before. He said the voice didn't always whisper. Sometimes it explained. He described moments when images flashed behind his eyes, scenes from a time long before he was born. A younger version of their mother, sitting in a dim room, shaking but determined. The ritual wasn't shown clearly, but the emotion was. Desperation mixed with relief. Not relief that it was over, but relief that she was no longer alone with it. Hamza said the presence didn't speak during these visions. It simply watched, patient, like something that knew time was on its side. This confession changed the way Adil looked at him. Adil began to wonder if the division had been uneven from the start. If one of them carried more of the burden than the others. He thought back to childhood moments, times when Hamza seemed withdrawn, when he talked to himself, when their mother hovered over him more than the rest. What if the ritual hadn't divided the demon equally? What if it had chosen a favorite? The idea made Adil sick. Meanwhile, Sarah followed another lead. She tracked down the last known address of one of the families mentioned in the archival records. The house was abandoned, windows boarded, yard overtaken by weeds. A neighbor, old and hesitant, agreed to speak briefly. He said the family left suddenly after a reunion. 3 brothers had come together after years apart. Within weeks, ambulances were called multiple times. Then one night, all the lights went on at once, every room glowing, and by morning the house was empty. No bodies. No explanation. Just silence. As Sarah walked away, she felt a sudden pressure behind her eyes, like someone was pushing against her thoughts. For a moment, she knew, without knowing how, that the family hadn't escaped. They had simply disappeared from the story. Back at the house, the siblings noticed new patterns. When one of them resisted the whispers, another would suffer stronger symptoms. If Adil prayed quietly, Sarah's head would ache. If Sarah tried to ground herself with familiar routines, Hamza would grow restless, pacing, agitated. It felt like the presence was balancing itself through them, correcting any attempt at resistance. The realization created tension between them. Every action now felt like a risk. Every choice had consequences for someone else. Trust began to crack. Adil suspected Hamza of hiding how deep his connection went. Sarah feared Adil's growing anger might give the presence more control. Hamza felt watched by both of them, as if they were already preparing to blame him for what was happening. The house amplified these emotions, feeding on doubt, turning small disagreements into long, quiet standoffs. One evening, during a sudden power outage, they lit candles and sat in the living room. The shadows danced across the walls, stretching too long, bending in ways that didn't match the flame. Without warning, all 3 felt the same sharp memory surface. Their mother standing in the kitchen, whispering apologies to no one. Her hands shaking as she touched their heads, one by one, as if counting them. At the time, they thought she was just tired. Now they understood she was checking. The whisper returned, louder than before, not in their ears, but in their thoughts. Balance is breaking. Hamza stood up suddenly, breathing hard. He said the presence was no longer content with waiting. It was testing them, learning how they responded, measuring fear, anger, love. Sarah noticed blood trickling from Hamza's nose. Seconds later, she felt the same warmth beneath her own. Adil felt dizzy, the room spinning as if the house itself was tilting. That was when a new fear settled in. What if the demon didn't need all three of them alive? What if reunification didn't mean sharing anymore? As the candles flickered, the siblings realized they were no longer just hosts. They were pieces in a slow-moving conflict, one that had started before they were born and was now tightening around them. The ritual had delayed something, not ended it. And whatever had been divided was growing impatient, pressing against the fragile balance that held it apart. Outside, the wind rose again, rattling the windows. Inside, the siblings sat in silence, each wondering the same unspoken question. When the presence finally chose, who would it choose to keep? The change came quietly, which somehow made it worse. There was no sudden crash, no dramatic sign that something had shifted. It was the silence. The whispers stopped for almost an entire day. No shared pain, no overlapping thoughts, no pressure in the air. The house felt empty in a way it hadn't since they arrived, like something had stepped back to observe from a distance. That was when Adil knew they were being studied. The presence had learned enough about fear. Now, it was testing hope. They tried to act normal, cooking together, talking about small things, pretending this pause meant relief. But every calm moment felt borrowed. Sarah caught herself flinching whenever her phone buzzed. Hamza stayed unusually still, his energy drained, like a storm waiting just beyond sight. Adil couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was coming would require a choice, and that choice would not be fair. That night, the dreams returned, stronger and sharper than before. This time, the dark room was larger. The candle burned higher, its flames splitting into three before merging back into one. The circle on the floor was cracked, lines broken, as if something had pushed outward from the center. The voice spoke again, but it sounded closer, more focused. "You are tired of carrying me?" They woke gasping, all three sitting upright at once. The clock read 3:33 a.m. outside. The wind was gone. The house was unnaturally still. Then the pain hit, not slowly, not one by one, but all at once. A pressure behind the eyes, a tightening in the chest, a shared sensation of being pulled inward. Sarah cried out. Adil dropped to his knees. Hamza stood frozen, whispering under his breath. "It wants alignment," he said. They didn't ask how he knew. From that moment on, the presence stopped hiding its influence. It began shaping their environment. The journals rearranged themselves overnight, pages flipped open to specific entries. Old family photos fell from the walls, always landing face down except one. Their mother, younger, eyes hollow with exhaustion, staring directly into the camera. The house lights flickered in patterns, not random anymore, but deliberate, almost communicative. The worst part was how the presence began using memory. Each sibling started recalling moments from childhood that felt altered. Sarah remembered a time when she was sick for weeks, bedridden, while Hamza stayed perfectly healthy, unusually calm. Adil remembered blacking out during an argument as a teenager, waking to find Hamza crying and their mother praying silently in the corner. Hamza remembered none of this, yet felt the weight of recognition when they spoke. The memories didn't contradict each other. They completed each other. The demon had always been moving between them. As tension grew, so did resentment. Sarah accused Adil of pushing too hard, of provoking whatever was watching. Adil accused Hamza of letting it in, of listening when he should have resisted. Hamza snapped back that neither of them understood what it was like to feel chosen. The argument escalated, voices raised, emotions raw. And with every word, the air grew heavier, thicker, as if the house itself approved of the conflict. Then the power went out again. This time, it didn't come back. Candles were lit, their flames stretching unnaturally tall. The shadows they cast didn't match the siblings' movements. One shadow lingered longer, broader, standing where no one stood. Sarah felt tears roll down her face without emotion attached, as if her body was reacting faster than her mind. Adil felt his heartbeat sync with something slower, deeper. Hamza closed his eyes, breathing unevenly. "It says the split is failing," he whispered. "It says the balance hurts." Sarah shook her head. "It doesn't feel pain," she said. "It causes it." Hamza looked at her then, truly looked, and something in his expression shifted. Fear, yes, but also understanding. "It remembers being whole," he said quietly. "It doesn't want to be three." That was when the realization settled like a weight in all of them. Reunification didn't just mean control. It meant concentration. One host. The presence began pressing harder, forcing moments of overlap. Sarah felt Adil's anger surge through her chest. Adil felt Hamza's fear wrap around his thoughts. Hamza felt Sarah's guilt crash into him like a wave. They were bleeding into each other, identities blurring at the edges. The more they resisted, the worse it became. Adil tried leaving the house. The moment he stepped outside, his vision went white. He collapsed on the porch, body shaking, breath shallow. Inside, Sarah screamed as the same pain tore through her chest. Hamza dropped to his knees, clutching his head, the voice roaring now, no longer whispering. "You cannot divide what is already returning." They dragged Adil back inside. The door slammed shut on its own. That night, the house changed. Rooms felt closer together. Hallways stretched longer than before. The walls creaked and shifted, as if adjusting around them. Time felt uneven. Minutes passed like seconds, then slowed to a crawl. The presence no longer hid its intentions. It pushed images into their minds, scenarios that felt like suggestions rather than threats. Adil saw himself alone, free, the others gone, the noise finally silent. Sarah saw her daughter safe, untouched, growing up without fear. Hamza saw nothing change at all, just continuity, a quiet acceptance that chilled him more than fear ever could. They didn't share these visions aloud, but the knowledge moved between them anyway. The final push came just before dawn. The presence gathered them in the living room, not physically, but mentally. Their thoughts aligned against their will, pulled toward the same center. The candle from their dreams appeared on the table, unlit, but real. The circle etched into the floor beneath it glowed faintly, cracks spreading like veins. Hamza stepped forward without realizing he was moving. Sarah reached for him, but froze. Adil felt the choice forming, heavy and unavoidable. The whisper filled the room, calm now, almost patient. "It is time to stop sharing." The candle flickered to life on its own. And as the first line of the circle sealed itself shut, the siblings understood that whatever happened next would change the shape of their lives forever, whether they survived it or not. The candle's flame didn't flicker like a normal flame. It held steady, tall and thin, casting a sharp circle of light that refused to spread. The cracks in the symbol beneath it pulsed faintly, like something breathing just under the floor. None of the siblings moved. Even blinking felt dangerous, as if breaking eye contact with the moment would trigger something irreversible. Then the voice spoke again, but this time it didn't sound singular. It layered itself, overlapping tones that felt uncomfortably familiar. "You remember more than you think." Hamza's hands began to shake. His breathing grew uneven, shallow, as if his body knew something his mind was trying to avoid. Sarah stepped closer, calling his name, but her voice echoed strangely, stretched, as though the room itself was repeating it back. Adil felt a sudden pressure behind his eyes, a rush of images that weren't his memories, but felt deeply personal. Their mother, sitting alone in the dark after the ritual, crying, not from relief, from fear. The presence pushed harder, forcing the memory to sharpen. The siblings saw her writing in the journal with trembling hands, pausing again and again, as if listening for something behind her. Then another image surfaced, one none of them had ever seen before. She was pregnant. Not once, not 3 times, but already carrying a child when the ritual was performed. The realization hit them all at once. Sarah felt her knees weaken. Adil's stomach twisted. Hamza let out a quiet, broken sound, somewhere between a gasp and a sob. The The presence latched onto the shock, feeding on it, twisting it into clarity. She did not divide me, the voice said calmly. She anchored me. The room felt smaller. The air grew thick, almost solid. The candle's flame bent toward Hamza, drawn by something unseen. He staggered back, shaking his head, whispering, "No, no, no," like a child refusing a truth too heavy to hold. The twist settled in slowly, painfully. The ritual hadn't been about sharing the burden equally. It had been about survival. Their mother hadn't divided the demon between her future children. She had passed it on before they were born. The presence had been tied to blood, yes, but one life had carried it first. The others had been created to stabilize it, to spread the pressure just enough to keep the host alive. Hamza. Adil felt a surge of anger so sharp it made his vision blur. Not at Hamza, but at the lie they had all lived in. Sarah felt a crushing wave of guilt, memories rearranging themselves into a pattern she couldn't unsee. Every time Hamza had been sick as a child, every time their mother had hovered over him, every time she had prayed longer when he slept. Hamza backed away until his shoulders hit the wall. "I didn't know," he said, his voice cracking. "I swear I didn't know." And he meant it. The presence hadn't just used him. It had protected him, shielding him from the truth until the moment it needed him to understand. The symptoms, the whispers, the visions, they weren't invitations. They were preparation. The candle flared brighter. "The balance is failing," the voice said again. "The anchors weaken with distance, with resistance." Adil felt something snap inside him. "You don't get to decide," he said through clenched teeth. "You don't get to choose one of us." The shadows shifted, stretching toward him. "I already did." The pain returned, sharper than ever. Sarah cried out as her vision doubled. Adil felt his heartbeat stutter. Hamza dropped to his knees, clutching his chest as if something inside him was trying to tear its way free. The shared connection surged violently, thoughts bleeding together, memories colliding, fear multiplying. And then something else happened. The house went quiet. Too quiet. The presence hesitated. For the first time since this began, there was a pause, not from strategy but confusion. Adil felt it like a ripple in the shared space between them. Sarah felt it too, a brief opening, like a door cracked open by mistake. Hamza looked up slowly, eyes wide, breathing hard. "It's not just us," he whispered. The journals began to fall from the shelves, pages scattering across the floor. One page slid to a stop at Sarah's feet. She picked it up with shaking hands. It was a page they had seen before, but something had changed. Ink that had once been faded now stood dark and clear, as if freshly written. A final entry. One their mother never finished. "I was wrong," it read. Division did not weaken it. It taught it how to survive. Below that, another line appeared, slowly as they watched. "If it becomes whole again, it will not stay." A chill ran through the room. Adil understood first. His blood ran cold as the implication took shape. "It's not trying to live through us," he said quietly. "It's trying to leave." The presence reacted instantly. The shadows surged. The candle flame shook violently. The voice lost its calm, its layers slipping into something sharper, more urgent. "This world holds me," it hissed. "Your bond feeds me. Completion frees me." Sarah's heart pounded. "Frees you to do what?" she demanded. The answer came not in words, but in images. Open doors. Unbroken bloodlines. No anchors. No limits. The stakes shifted in an instant. This wasn't just about one host anymore. Reunification wasn't the end goal, it was the beginning. If the demon became whole, it wouldn't be trapped in a single body. It would move beyond them, beyond the family, beyond the rules that had contained it for decades. Hamza screamed as the presence tightened its grip, realizing its mistake. The candle tipped over on its own, wax spilling into the cracks of a circle, sealing them further. The symbol glowed brighter, heat radiating through the floor. Sarah reached for Hamza again, ignoring the pain that tore through her arm. Adil grabbed both of them, pulling them together, anchoring them with sheer force of will. The The presence roared inside their minds, no longer whispering, no longer patient. You cannot stop what has already begun. The house groaned, walls vibrating, windows rattling as if the structure itself was struggling to hold. Outside, lights across the street flickered on and off in rapid succession. Somewhere nearby, a car alarm wailed and then cut out abruptly. The siblings clung to each other, terrified, breathless, understanding now that the choice before them was far worse than they had imagined. It wasn't about who would carry the demon. It was about whether they would let it escape at all. As the circle burned brighter and the presence gathered itself for something final, one thought echoed through all three of them, heavy with dread. Their mother hadn't delayed the end. She had delayed the release. And now, the delay was over. The heat from the glowing circle became unbearable, forcing the siblings to back away together, still gripping one another as if letting go would cause them to disappear. The house shook, not violently but with a low, steady pressure, like something pressing outward from the inside. The presence surged through their shared thoughts, frantic now, stripped of patience. It had been so close. Close enough to taste freedom. And that desperation changed everything. Hamza was the first to realize it. "It's scared," he said, his voice hoarse but steady. "Not of us. Of being held." The words cut through the noise. The presence recoiled slightly, not retreating, but reacting. For the first time, it wasn't controlling the moment. It was responding to it. Sarah felt the shift immediately, a loosening in her chest, like a knot beginning to give. Adil felt his racing heart slow just enough to think clearly. Their mother's journal pages fluttered across the floor, stopping at the same unfinished entry. Sarah knelt, ignoring the burning sensation in her palms, and read the final lines again. She understood now what they meant. Division had taught the demon survival, but connection could still teach it containment. The ritual their mother performed had been incomplete, rushed by fear and pain. She had divided the burden, but never sealed it. She had believed love would be enough to keep it from growing. She had been wrong, but she hadn't been entirely helpless. She had left behind the one thing the presence couldn't fully control. Choice. The presence fed on fear, conflict, imbalance. It grew stronger when they turned on each other, when resentment fractured their bond. But when they stood together, truly together, it struggled. Not because it was weak, but because it depended on division to move. Adil felt the truth settle into him. "It can't leave if we don't let it complete itself," he said. "And it can't complete itself if we refuse the role it wants." Hamza looked at the circle, then at his siblings. For years, the presence had shaped his life quietly, steering him away from questions, from memories, from truth. Now it pressed against him hardest, trying to force surrender. He could feel it coiling inside him, desperate to become whole. He took a breath and did the one thing it never expected. He resisted without fighting. "I'm not your anchor anymore," Hamza said calmly. "And I'm not your door." The presence screamed, not aloud, but through every nerve, every shared thought. The circle flared, then flickered. The candle flame wavered violently. Sarah stepped forward, placing her hand over Hamza's heart, steady and firm. Adil joined them, pressing his palm against Hamza's back. Together, they grounded him. The pain surged one last time, sharp and blinding, but it didn't spread. For the first time since this began, the sensation stayed contained within the circle. The presence thrashed, trying to break the bond, but found no fear to latch onto. No anger, no guilt, only resolve. The house groaned as the light from the circle dimmed, cracks sealing not with heat, but with cold. The candles sputtered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. For a moment no one moved. No one breathed. Then the pressure lifted. It wasn't gone. They knew that instantly. The presence still existed, still bound to blood and memory. But it was no longer reaching outward, no longer expanding. It had been forced inward, compressed into the limits it once avoided. The circle remained etched into the floor, dark and still. A warning, not a threat. Hamza collapsed, exhausted but conscious. Sarah held him, tears streaming freely now, the weight of years breaking loose all at once. Adil sat beside them, shaking, not from fear, but from the sudden absence of it. The house slowly settled, walls creaking back into place, the air growing lighter with every passing second. Morning came quietly. Sunlight filtered through dusty windows, revealing a house that looked ordinary again. No shadows lingering too long. No whispers between breaths. The siblings slept for hours, the deepest rest they'd had in weeks. When they woke, the connection was still there, but it was different. No shared pain. No forced thoughts. Just awareness. Like knowing someone is in the next room, even with the door closed. They talked for a long time that day. About their mother. About her fear, her mistakes, her love. About how trauma can echo through families, shaping lives in ways that feel supernatural when they're left unspoken. They didn't excuse her choices, but they understood them. She had been trying to survive. To protect her children with the only tools she believed she had. The journals were packed away carefully, not destroyed, not hidden. History mattered. Forgetting was how this had almost ended everything. Adil decided to sell the house, but not right away. Some places needed time to rest. Sarah returned to her daughter with honesty instead of silence, choosing truth over fear. Hamza took time off from university, not to run, but to reconnect with himself, separate from the role he'd been shaped into. The presence never returned in the way it had before. Sometimes, late at night, Hamza still felt it stir, quiet, contained, aware of its limits. It no longer whispered promises or threats. It existed like a shadow behind a wall, unable to cross unless invited. And Hamza never invited it. The siblings learned something important in the aftermath. The demon had never been the only danger. Silence was. Fear was. Division was. What saved them wasn't strength or knowledge or ritual. It was unity. The burden had been shared once out of desperation. This time it was shared by choice, and that made all the difference. Years later, when the house was finally empty and the circle long sealed beneath new flooring, the story remained. Not as a warning about demons or possession, but as a reminder that what haunts families most often isn't something supernatural. It's what we refuse to face together. And sometimes, surviving the darkness isn't about escaping it. It's about standing still, holding on, and refusing to let it decide who you become.